Hello, I'm Nicholas, and in this video we will be editing a macro photo from A to Z with Darktable, with particular accent on one module, which is the color calibration tool. The color calibration module, which is a white balance module, which we will use not once, not twice, but three times. Yes, three times. For three different purposes. I'll also be using the color balance RGB tool and little bits and bobs. We'll see how that goes. I'll try and be concise and as clear as I can. Okay, so let's go then. Okay, so before we start editing in Darktable, I'd like to show you this is a quick snap of the photo we're going to edit today, before it's been edited. So as you see, it's a picture of a ladybird, and it is inside it's been inside a plant, a fennel plant. So lots of green leaves and stalks everywhere. Just to show you what the problem is, here I can draw a little bit on this one. Let's move out of the plant. This is not the actual same plant. I took this picture off the internet. But the situation is the following. We have a ladybird which is situated in the centre of a big clump of fennel. So the ladybird, you know, it's got a black head, it's got spots, and it's got some white on its head too. Try to get a decent ladybird there. Okay, well that is a ladybird, if I say so. So what happens now? Let's look at the light. So imagine the sun is round here. I'll draw it like a 2-year-old. There we are, the sun. So this is essentially white light. So it's lighting up the whole scene. Now in a macro shot, I'm only interested in what's happening just in the area, just around the ladybird. So anything that is lit by this white light will have a white balance that needs to be set. The problem you see is that the ladybird will not be lit directly by this light. Now to tell the truth, I did use a flash as well. That doesn't change much. The main light was a flash and not the sun. Even so, there were plenty of branches between the source of light and the ladybird. So what's happening is the ladybird isn't lit directly. It's probably lit indirectly quite a lot by the rays of light bouncing off the leaves, bouncing all around, even probably coming from behind as well, bouncing around and lighting up the ladybird. Now the problem is when you bounce light off a green surface, well, this light changes colour and becomes green. So what's happening now, what I have to do is I have to set a different white balance for the ladybird as for the rest of the fennel plant. So that's the situation, and that's why we're going to use the colour calibration tool twice, which we can do because this colour calibration tool, contrary to the white balance, can be used locally with masks. So we'll have one colour calibration instance for the fennel, one colour calibration instance for the ladybird, and we'll use it a third time. It will get a little bit geeky just for the third time. We'll use the colour calibration tool to solve a problem in colours. Okay, well we'll see that. I'll explain that as we get along. So let's go into Darktable now and edit this picture. So here we are now in Darktable. This is the image as it appears when I haven't touched anything. So there's basically the white balance is set on camera reference. Exposure, I'll do the first steps quickly. So to set exposure, I'm going to click on this little light bulb here, just to so I've got a white reference around to check the exposure, which looks actually pretty decent, so I'm not going to touch that. Then I would go to Filmic to set the white point, the black point, and let's see how we can deal with the dynamic range. So let's bring the white up a little bit, something like that, and bring I think we can go a little bit further in the blacks. I think we're okay there. We can check with this overexposure and underexposure warning that we're fine. If I go further, at one point, I'll probably start clipping the blacks. No, I'm not clipping them. Okay, anyway, I was okay around about there. Now, in the Look tab, we could add a bit of contrast. Maybe add just a little and a bit more latitude. Now the latitude here, what I'm doing is I'm making the space between the two white points further, and between the two white points we have a straight line. So that means that the curve here is getting a bit steeper. The fall off, the roll off in the highlights and shadows will get a bit steeper. And the byproduct of that is that I am giving more saturation. This is what I define as midtones, and the midtones here have a saturation of 100. And as we go underneath this first point of latitude, so this is the toe, if my memory serves me well, the toe there, the saturation will fall off to 0 as we go to the blacks, and after the shoulder. This is the shoulder where there's a roll off in the highlights, and the saturation will fall to 0 as well. So I'm adding a little bit more saturation in the higher tones and in the lower tones. It's not very, very visible on the photo, so I won't spend much time on that. Okay, so color calibration. Maybe I could switch off these warnings here and get back to a bigger picture there. Now, it's difficult to set colours using a flash because these greens look a bit washed out. So maybe I'm going to manually bring the hue down a little bit just to get the greens a bit greener. So you can hear they were too yellow for me, my taste. So a bit greener. There we are, something like that. What I need to do now is exclude the ladybird. The ladybird doesn't look too bad actually, but we will see when I've actually set a different white balance, we will see the difference a bit better. So now to select the leaves without selecting the ladybird, I think the best way to do that would be with a parametric mask, and I think I'm going to select the greens. So here I would go to this color space here, JZ, CZ, HZ, and HZ are the hues, and I'm going to select here range based on an area, and I will select big area of greens and see what happens there. Now to see what is actually happening, let's turn on the mask here, display the mask, and I'm going to try and select just this ladybird. So I could try and select a little bit more, which is not too bad there. Now the problem is, you see, I want to exclude a maximum on the ladybird. On the ladybird it's working well, but I'm actually now excluding parts around. So I'm not too worried about these little dots. What I could do is feather a little bit, just so I don't add any kind of noise or anything. I have to just feather that a little bit. What I could do is just try and select here the areas just concerned, the areas here with the ladybird, and for that I'll go into the drawn and parametric. So the settings for the parametric mask stay the same, and I'll draw a mask. I'll add a path here just around the ladybird, and now what I need to do is get the inverse of that. Now I always play around a little bit with this and get it wrong quite often, but there I seem to have it. So I have selected all the areas without the parametric mask here, and the parametric mask is actually only being used inside the shape. So there we have a good mask for the ladybird, and there we are. And so the colour calibration, as you see, off is quite yellow, and here we've got a bit greener. So we seem to have, we've done that one. Okay, now let's set up a second instance of the colour calibration. So click here on New Instance. Now I can rename this if I want to have it in the list. So Ladybird. There we are, so I know what that one's doing. And I need to do a white balance on the ladybird, and just on the ladybird and not on the greens. What happens when you duplicate, you have a new instance of colour calibration, is here in the first module, CAT, we're in none, it's bypassing. It thinks, which is quite logical, that we've already done the colour calibration once. So now what we want to use here is a channel mixer, which is not the case here. So I'm going to have to click on CAT16 and choose a part of the ladybird which I think should be neutral grey. Now maybe if I do that, over the whole picture's changed, so I'm actually losing a little bit what I might have in mind, or at least in my head. We have to have a bit of confidence in the choice of this area as being grey, and try and mask that in and see what happens. Here, if you see there's a warning, double CAT applied. Well, that's fine because I did that on purpose. And let's blend that in properly then. Parametric mask. What I'm going to do, I'm going to do exactly the same thing with, I'm going to select the greens here. Select the greens. So here I have selected everything except for the ladybird. And what I can do is inverse this parametric mask. So now I have just the ladybird. And I can try and select it a little bit better. Maybe by, if I can move these in a little bit. Yeah, that's the ones. I'm selecting that, but I will have to select, sorry, I clicked there on the picture. I could actually select now with a drawn mask. So add a path. So basically it's the same as before, just to be certain that I'm only selecting the parts that are in here. And here, no, I don't want to inverse that. Inclusive. Now I'm always choosing this. Start again. Let's erase that. So I want to select the ladybird. That's it. I started clicking around before. So ladybird selected. Sorry about that. Now, normally on this kind of case it's much easier because I'm just drawing around the place I already want to select, so there's no options to choose. So I selected the greens, inverted the selection here on the parametric mask and just did a little path around the ladybird. So I'm just selecting the ladybird, and now if we have a look at that, I have actually changed the white balance on the ladybird, and that should look better. It's looked before and after. And now we can see that that yellowish tinge has disappeared. So now I have a satisfactory white balance on the ladybird, and I've kept the nice greens on the fennel. I do have a problem area in this picture, which is this part here at the bottom, which I find quite distracting, these blues. Now what it actually was, if I remember rightly, there was a wall behind, a white wall behind the fennel plants. Now you can't see it here because obviously the leaves were much denser, but here at the bottom part you can actually see some white parts coming through, and I find that a bit distracting. So some people would say, well, it doesn't matter, just crop it off and be done with it. But I don't want to do that because, well, let's try and do something a bit more difficult. That's how you learn, isn't it? There are several ways. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the colour of this. There are several ways to do that. The first thing you think of is in the colour RGB, colour balance RGB, the new colour balance RGB module, there is a hue shift slider, and you think, well, I could rotate the hues and turn that to green. Let's see what happens when it rotates. So what's happening? Here I've put the vector scope here instead of the histogram, just to show you here when I rotate the hues that the colours are actually rotating. So yellow turns to red, red turns to magenta, magenta turns to blue, which turns to cyan and green, and the colours are all rotating. But if I actually look at this problem area here, you can actually see that everything is changing, but not, at least not a lot, that area there. So the problem area is not changing. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is because it's a very bright colour, close to white, so it doesn't really have a very defined hue. So if you rotate white, well, you get white, and you rotate black, you get black. So that, sorry, no use to me. The other module you might think of is Colorize. So Colorize, now the Colorize module actually just paints over the whole photo with a colour. So I could actually paint that green, try and get a satisfactory green, which is not that easy because all these greens are quite light. Try and get a darker one, I don't know, try and get something like that. And then I could, I'm not very good at choosing colours, anyway, I could try and mask that in. That would be a possibility. I actually have another solution which I find a little bit better, a little bit more natural, is to use the colour calibration again. So let's have a new instance, and we'll call that, oh dear me, 2. Colour calibration 2, rename, and we'll call that problem. That's for the problem area. Problem area, call it problem. And I'm actually going to use the channel mixer now. The channel mixer is a complicated tool to use, and I think I will make a video on how to use this channel mixer and why probably a lot of people probably don't understand it really. It is basically a white balance tool, which is fine as long as you move things just a little bit. We can fine tune the white balance, and that's fine. It's a good tool if you move it just a little bit. If you start going wild with it and you expect to get something decent, well, good luck to you. No, it's too complicated for that. Now the maths behind it is a matrix multiplication, so there are 9 variables, 3 input values, red, green, blue, 9 variables, and with those 9 variables you get 3 output values, which are red, green and blue. And we can actually use that in a simple way, actually just changing a little bit what there is now, because if you look at this tab, we have input R, G and B, we have 1 for red and 0 for green and 0 for blue. So what we do is we take the red, multiply by 1, 0 out the 2 others, and that's the output. So really the output is equal to 1 times the input, so they're equal. And on green we 0 out the red and blue and just keep 1 times the green input to give the green output. And for the blue we 0 out the red and green, keep 1 times the blue, and 1 times the blue is equal to the blue. So really in the state it is in actually now, we're not changing anything. You can actually, with this, turn any colour into any other colour. So I'll show you how that works. If I take the colour picker, now before I do that, as I'm changing the colours, I'm going to mask. I'm going to make the mask first and change the colours after. because as I move these, the colours will change and I might have problems finding the masking out the areas I want to change. So let's get a parametric mask and try, and I'll do this with lightness maybe. So let's look at the mask. Now I know by experience that these areas are quite bright. So I'll try and do this a little bit quickly. Try not to spend too much time selecting those areas. Maybe I'll just go with a parametric. I could actually make it a little bit stronger, and I could choose the greens again. I know all this is part of the area is green, and exclude that. And maybe now if I back off, yeah, I've selected too much there. Now, the first time I did it, I actually did it just with, I'm going to zero that out, and I'm going to do it just with the luminosity. I think we should be fine. Now I know the bright areas are there, so I've actually selected them. I've selected a bit too much, but we can refine the mask after. I will add a drawn mask on top of that, just to be sure that I'm only working in the area of the photo where there's a problem. And so now I've done that, I can go back to here and let's do a little bit of magic with the channel mixer then. So what I do is I'm going to choose a colour in the problem area, and here I have 155 red, 170 green and 162 blue. Now what I'm going to do that is I'm going to write that in a little text file. Where is it? Text file here. So I'm going to write those down, because as I change the channel mixer, these values will change. Well, this one won't, but if I put them on live sample, if I click on the plus here, it will go into the live sample and it will change after. So I'd rather do it this way. So anyway, you pick the colour, the starting colour, and then you pick your end colour. And the end colour, let's take a darkish kind of background green. So what do we have? 53. Go to the next line. 53. Tab 69. Tab 26. Okay. So what I am going to do is the red is now 155, but I want it to be 53. So I'm going to divide the reds by 155 to multiply by 53, which is essentially multiplying by the fraction 53 over 155. And that is the number I'm going to put in here. On the red, instead of 1, I'm going to write 53 over 155. So right click, 53 over 155, and that'll calculate it automatically. You see the areas here have changed. For the greens, so 69 over 170. So go into the greens and 69 over 170. And now they've changed, and back to the text, 26 over 162 in the blues, 26 over 162, 26 over 162. And there we are. So we have now, we've actually scaled. What it's actually doing is it's done some scaling on the colours. Now it's not very good for the moment, but what we can actually do is blend that in better with the mask. You can actually blend that if I use a feathering guide, mask blur, and maybe I can refine the selection just to make sure. Now I'm not going to be too careful on this because I don't know, there's not too many details. Usually the feathering guide is what I'd use, and probably the opacity, if I bring that down. and brightening that. Okay, and the contrast, you want to blend it in. Actually, it wasn't too bad. It needs a bit of work, to be honest. If I exclude a bit more, we're actually focusing on this area now. So you can probably, as you see the changes, you probably think that it's not looking too good. But if I go back to what it was like before and back to what it is now, you see on and off. Now the colours are a little bit dark, maybe I should have changed them a bit to make them lighter. Well, I can do that because I have a brightness tab here, so I can make them brighter and blend them in. And red, if I add a bit of red, that'll turn the greens a bit more vibrant. And actually, that's not too bad. It's a bit too colourful. Bring that down a little bit, blend it in, and there we are. I don't think that anyone looking at this photo now for the first time would actually think that has been changed, to be honest. That's what it was like before, that's what it's like now. So this part, you know, a bright part in a photo will attract your attention. The eye goes to the lighter parts of a photo. So that has solved the problem. So that is a creative use of the colour calibration. Just simple maths, simple recipe. Probably needs to be explained, I suppose, but that's for another video. I think I'll make one on the colour calibration too, at least on the colour balance for that. Okay then, let's finish this photo off with some colour with the colour balance RGB tool. So the first thing I do is add a bit of vibrance, which will even up the colourfulness in the photo, adding more colour to the less vibrant parts, I suppose, and leaving the others as they are, so maybe about 20%. I'll add some chroma, which will do the same thing but evenly across all the colours. Now be careful with the chroma, because if you remember on the video I made about this colour RGB tool, if you push the chroma too far, you're actually pushing each colour to a monochromatic light, and the monochromatic light are the ones on the edge of the colour space, and those can look very, very artificial. In real life is made of lights that have many different wavelengths. So we can push that a little bit just to get some colour. Saturation will also add chroma while lowering the lightness, and so we can get those richer tones. So a little bit of all three, I think that's fine. So we actually change the colours here, and they look a little bit better now. What I'd like to do is push these a little bit more, but I'm a bit worried about what will happen to the ladybird if I push the saturation too far. These parts are getting dark. I don't really want to push that too far. What I'm going to do is use the masking option here, the masking tab, to actually only select the greens. So if you remember how this works, there are three zones. There are the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. And for the shadows, at 0, we have a mask that starts at 100% opacity, and it gradually goes down. As we go through the midtones into the highlights, gradually goes down to 0. So you have to remember with this tool that if you modify the shadows, you're modifying the shadows a lot, the midtones a little bit, the highlights a tiny bit, but you're actually modifying everything. The highlights here start at 0 opacity, go through the midtones at 50% opacity, and up to 100% opacity at the brightest point. Thing to do now is to always, when you are working with these, is click on the white fulcrum here. That is explained in the video too. It's a simple math thing as well. It's to avoid darkening highlights that we really want to brighten. So it's just a simple click. We can have a look what these shadow areas are. If I click there, we can see the shadow areas, what's showing through the dark part of the ladybird. The midtones here are kind of a hazy mess, difficult to see what the midtones are, nothing very defined. And the highlights, we have some of the branches, highlights around here. And what we can do is we can use these, if I want to select the branches, I'm going to start with the highlights because I already have quite a few. And what I can do is I can make the fall off steeper, which means the transition is smaller, so the selection will be more defined. And I can move the midtones left or right with this middle grey fulcrum. And I'm going to move it to the left, which means that the midtones are getting darker, the highlights, so the highlight area, look. So now the highlights is everything I can see. And the parts here with the checkers are not selected. So now everything I do on the highlights will actually affect what I can see here and not affect the parts that are in checkers. And what's quite good about this is that the fall-offs, the roll-offs between what's selected and what is not are very soft. So let's go back to the master. What I could do is turn off the mask actually. Turn off the mask. And in the master, I could add global, not global saturation, but saturation just to the highlights. And now I know that it is only affecting the parts that I was looking at. Maybe that's a little bit too much. So there we are. That is a use, one case use anyway, of the masking in this Color Balance RGB tool. To finish off the photo now, let's add a bit of sharpness. So for sharpness, I use the Contrast Equalizer. Contrast Equalizer here. Let's switch that on. And there is a sharpen preset here, which I find very, very strong. So I'm going to tone that down. What I do actually I have a preset for that, but what it is essentially is only adding contrast to the right hand side. Make a little curve. There, a reasonable curve. Just in the areas of fine detail and leaving the rest alone. So probably can't see a lot if I switch it on and off. There's a visible difference here, and that's enough for me because that is the focal point of the photo is the ladybird. So that's good for me. We could add some local contrast too, maybe local contrast on, so that's off and on. Maybe that's just a little bit strong. So what I do sometimes is I add a mask, and what I sometimes do, now we have this new option, which is the details threshold, is I will only add local contrast to areas that have some detail. It sounds logical to me. There's local contrast. You don't have a lot of local contrast in blurry areas. Now, you have to be careful with this because the selection is very gritty, very dotty, and if I leave it like that, then essentially what I'm doing is everywhere there's some yellow, I'm adding some local contrast, and where it's not, I'm not adding anything. And if I leave it gritty like that, I'm just adding noise to the photo. So I need to feather that to smoothen out the mask. Maybe a bit of blur. Just to be sure not to add any noise. And there I have it. So off and on. It's quite subtle. So I can actually up that a little bit now and go, there we are. So I've added some local contrast. That gives a bit of depth because some of the branches have extra contrast added and the ones in the background that are blurry don't. So that will help give a sense of depth to the photo. And last but not least, I'm not sure if this should not have been done first actually, is the Chromatic Aberrations. Just click, that's for me just an automatic click. It could do with some exploring, but it's for me, for the moment anyway, a one-click thing. Chromatic Aberrations. Just make sure in macro especially, on very fine details, you do see a lot of chromatic aberration. Let's move that off. I'm not going to do any noise reduction because this was taken at quite a low ISO. It was at 400 ISO, and so there we are. This ends the editing of this photo. I can show you where we've been through. Let's compress the history stack. We started just with filmic, so with a photo that was like this. Color calibration, so to give a nice white balance to the greens. Color calibration on the ladybird to get the whites back, essentially on the insect. Color calibration problem was to get rid of those highlights there and turn them green. And then a lot of work, that's very spectacular, this colour balance RGB tool, a lot of work on the colour there. Bit of sharpness, local contrast, chromatic aberrations, those are very slight things, but they do make a difference. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you again later.